That's when I found Voices in the Dark, one of those late-night radio shows where people call in anonymously to confess their secrets. I'd never listened to it before, but something about the host's warm, inviting voice made me stay on the channel. People were sharing stories about workplace crushes and childhood misdeeds. Nothing too serious. The host would crack jokes, and callers would laugh along. It felt like being part of some intimate late-night club. Then a new caller came on, and my whole body went cold. "I've been living a double life," the female voice said, and my hand froze on the volume dial. I knew that voice, the slight southern lilt, the way she drew out certain words. It was Emma's voice. My Emma's. My wife of 12 years. No, I told myself. Couldn't be. Emma was at her friend Sarah's house, helping with some home renovation project. She texted me just hours ago. "Still at Sarah's. Don't wait up, honey." But the voice continued, and with each word, the denial crumbled. "My husband travels a lot for work," she said, letting out a small laugh that I'd heard countless times across our dinner table. "He thinks I'm the perfect wife, always busy with friends or charity work when he's away." My hands began to shake on the steering wheel. Traffic had thinned to almost nothing on the dark highway, but I could barely focus on the road. The voice, Emma's voice, kept going, describing an affair with a neighbor. She spoke about it like it was some romantic adventure, something exciting and harmless. Then came the details that made my stomach lurch. She mentioned Giovanni's, our favorite Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. She complained about the sage green bedsheets I'd bought for our master bedroom, the ones she'd always said clashed with the wall color. And then, as if the universe needed to remove any last shred of doubt, she mentioned our dog. "Even our golden retriever, Barney, has gotten used to him coming over," she said with that same casual tone, as if she were discussing the weather. "He doesn't even bark anymore." I pulled over onto the shoulder, my hazard lights blinking in the darkness. 18-wheelers roared past, rocking my SUV with each passage, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing through every business trip I'd taken in the past year, every late night at Sarah's house. Every time Emma had seemed slightly distant, but I'd brushed it off as stress from her job at the real estate agency. The radio show continued, but I wasn't really listening anymore. My phone sat on the passenger seat, and Emma's earlier text message glowed on the screen. "Still at Sarah's. Don't wait up, honey." 3 dots appeared. She was typing something new. Probably another lie. I turned off my phone. Whatever she was about to say, whatever excuse or fiction she was crafting, I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. First, I needed proof, real, undeniable evidence that would force her to face the truth. And I knew exactly how to get it. The plan began forming in my mind as I sat there on the shoulder of I-95, watching the red taillights disappear into the darkness ahead. Emma had no idea I was already on my way home. She thought I was still in Boston, scheduled to return tomorrow evening. That gave me time. Time to gather evidence. Time to set things up. Time to make sure that when the truth came out, there would be no possibility of denial or excuse. I pulled back onto the highway, my hands steady now. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something else, a cold, focused determination. Emma wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that some games have consequences. Last edited 2 minutes ago. Emma's voice from the radio show kept echoing in my head. That casual laugh as she described betraying our marriage. 12 years together, and I'd never heard that particular tone before. Light-hearted. Almost gleeful about her deception. It made me wonder how many other sides of her I'd never seen. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I called Sarah, Emma's supposed best friend, at midnight. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Jack, is everything okay?" "Sarah, I need you to be honest with me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Is Emma with you right now?" The pause that followed told me everything before she even spoke.
"No."
"I haven't seen Emma in weeks. She canceled our lunch plans last Thursday, said she was busy with work." My free hand gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Thanks, Sarah. One more thing. Has she ever mentioned anything about spending time with Brian? Our neighbor. Another pause, longer this time. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was different, cautious, but with an undercurrent of anger. Jack, I think you should know something. I saw them together last month at Riverside Mall. They didn't see me, but they weren't acting like just neighbors. I thanked her and hung up, my mind already racing ahead. Sarah had unknowingly given me my first piece of evidence, but I needed more. Much more. And I knew exactly how to get it. The drive home took exactly 47 minutes. I counted every single one of them, using the time to plan. Emma thought I was still in Boston, wouldn't expect me home until tomorrow evening. That gave me the advantage. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Brian's house was dark except for a faint blue glow from an upstairs window, probably a TV. His wife Linda's car was in their driveway, but his silver BMW was conspicuously absent. I made a mental note of that detail. Inside our house, everything looked normal. Emma's keys in the bowl by the door. Her coffee mug from that morning in the sink. Barney, our golden retriever, padded over to greet me, tail wagging. "Hey, boy," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Been having company over while I'm gone?" I went to my home office and booted up my laptop. First thing first, I needed to check our smart home security system. We'd installed it 6 months ago, including cameras covering our front door and driveway. Emma had complained about the expense at the time. Now I understood why. The system kept a rolling 30-day history of all activity. I started with today's footage, working backward. Nothing unusual at first. Emma leaving this morning. Me leaving for Boston 2 days ago. Then I hit the previous week. My hand started shaking again, but this time it wasn't from anger. There it was, clear as day. Emma arriving home at 2:43 a.m. last Tuesday, a night I was supposedly in Chicago for work, but she wasn't alone. A silver BMW pulled up right behind her. I downloaded the footage to a secure cloud drive, then moved on to my next task. We had a shared family iPad in the kitchen, mainly used for recipes and shopping lists. Emma often forgot to log out of her accounts on it. I picked it up, hoping, yes, she was still logged into her email. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment as a final moral debate raged in my mind. But then I remembered her voice on the radio, that carefree laugh as she described deceiving me, and I started searching. What I found in the next hour would become the foundation of everything that followed. But I wasn't going to confront her yet. No, this needed to be handled differently. Emma had turned our marriage into a performance, entertaining herself by fooling everyone around us. Well, now it was my turn to put on a show. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to her parents, then to mine, to our closest friends, to her colleagues at the real estate agency, everyone who needed to be there when the curtain finally fell. "I'm planning a surprise party for Emma," I told them all. "Tomorrow evening at our house. It's really important that everyone can make it. And please, keep it absolutely secret. I want her to be completely surprised." Oh, she would be surprised, all right. Just not in the way anyone expected. The hardest part about hosting a party to destroy your wife's life is keeping up appearances. I spent the morning arranging flowers, setting out appetizers, and pretending everything was normal while my heart hammered against my ribs like a caged animal trying to break free. Emma's parents arrived first, her father Robert in his usual pressed khakis, her mother Patricia fussing with a bottle of wine she'd brought. They'd always treated me like a son, and seeing their eager smiles made my stomach twist. They had no idea they were about to witness their daughter's carefully constructed life crumble to pieces. "Jack, honey, this is so thoughtful of you," Patricia said, hugging me. "Emma's been saying you've been distant lately with all your business trips. This is exactly what you both need. If she only knew." My sister Karen arrived next, then Emma's brother Mike and his wife. Close friends from the neighborhood filtered in, and finally, Linda, Brian's wife, slipped in quietly. She looked tired, worn down. Now I understood why. I'd called her last night after discovering the security footage, and her response had been simple. "I've been waiting for someone else to notice. I have things you need to see." I gathered everyone in the living room, making small talk about work, about the weather, about anything except what was about to happen. The excited chatter about the surprise party filled the room while I connected my phone to the TV, hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. Before Emma gets here, I announced, I wanted to share something special with all of you. A little radio show I discovered last night. I hit play on the recording I'd made. The host's voice filled the room, talking about secrets and confessions. People shifted on the sofas, looking politely interested but confused. Why were we listening to this? Linda caught my eye from across the room. She knew. Her hands were clenched in her lap, knuckles white. Next to her, Sarah, Emma's supposed best friend, was staring at the floor, already piecing it together. Caller after caller shared their stories. A woman confessing to stealing from her workplace. A man admitting he'd never learned to read. Normal secrets, normal confessions. The tension in the room grew with each passing moment, though only Linda and Sarah seemed to understand why. Then Emma's voice filled the room. I've been living a double life, her recorded voice said, crystal clear through our surround sound speakers. Patricia's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Robert straightened in his chair, frowning. And at that exact moment, like some cosmic twist of fate, our front door opened. Emma's voice continued from the speakers, describing her affair, just as she stepped into the entryway. She was fumbling with her keys, her purse, a shopping bag, normal movements that seemed surreal against the soundtrack of her own betrayal playing in the background. She looked up, freezing in place as she registered several things at once. The room full of people, the sound of her own voice, the expression on her father's face as he slowly turned toward her. The shopping bag slipped from her fingers, landing with a dull thud on our hardwood floors. But that wasn't even the most dramatic moment of the evening, because right behind Emma, looking equally shocked, stood Brian. He'd been about to follow her inside, not realizing he was walking straight into his own exposure. The room fell into a silence so complete you could hear Barney's tail thumping against the floor in the kitchen, still the only innocent one among us. Time seemed to stop in our living room as Emma's recorded voice continued to play, describing her affair in intimate detail while the real Emma stood frozen in the doorway, Brian hovering behind her like a ghost. The contrast between her recorded laughter and her current expression of horror created a moment so surreal it felt like we were all trapped in some terrible dream. "Turn it off," Emma whispered. Then louder, "Turn it off." I didn't move. Neither did anyone else. We all watched as she stumbled forward, her designer purse falling from her shoulder. Behind her, Brian had the good sense to stay in the doorway, though his presence alone had already caused Patricia to let out a small, wounded sound of recognition. "It's not what you think," Emma said, her voice trembling. She looked around the room desperately, seeking an ally, but found only shocked and horrified faces. "This isn't. I can explain." Her recorded voice filled the silence. "He thinks I'm the perfect wife, always busy with friends or charity work when he's away." "Stop it." Emma lunged for the TV, but I stepped between her and the screen. The room had become uncomfortably warm with so many people packed in, the tension making it hard to breathe. "Why stop it?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. "Isn't this the attention you wanted?" Sharing your story with thousands of radio listeners wasn't enough. Robert, Emma's father, stood up slowly. His face had turned a dangerous shade of red, his hands clenched into fists. "Princess," he said, using his childhood nickname for her, though it now dripped with disappointment. "Tell me this isn't real. Tell me this is some kind of mistake." Emma's eyes darted between her father and me, then to her mother who sat with both hands pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face. My sister Karen had moved to comfort Patricia, but her eyes never left Emma, watching with a mix of disgust and fascination. "Daddy, please," Emma's voice cracked. It was just a stupid radio show. People make up stories all the time. They encourage you to be dramatic." "Dramatic." Linda's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood up, pulling something from her purse. "Is that what you call this?" She held up her phone, showing what looked like a text message thread. The messages you sent to my husband while I was in the hospital with our son? The room collectively inhaled. This was news even to me. I hadn't known about Linda's evidence yet. Emma's face, already pale, went almost gray. Emma started, but Linda wasn't finished. March 15th. Linda read from her phone, her voice shaking. Miss you already. Can't wait until next week when Jack's in Chicago. That was the night Tommy was having his appendix removed. Brian told me he was working late at the office. Brian finally stepped forward. Linda, honey, don't you dare honey me, Linda snapped, then turned back to the room. I have hundreds of these. Pictures too. Dating back months. My sister let out a low whistle. Sarah, who had been quiet until now, stood up. I should have said something sooner, she said, looking at me apologetically. I saw them together at Riverside Mall last month. It wasn't innocent. Emma's composure cracked. These people are all lying, she shouted, gesturing wildly. Sarah's just jealous because I got the promotion at work. Linda's bitter about her marriage. They're trying to destroy me. Like you destroyed our marriage? I asked quietly, pulling out my phone. Or should we talk about the security camera footage from our driveway? The one that shows Brian's car parked outside our house at 2 a.m. last Tuesday. The blood drained from both Emma and Brian's faces. They'd had no idea about the cameras. We'd installed them after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. But they were easy to forget about. Just like the shared iPad in the kitchen. Just like the credit card statements. Just like all the little threads that, when pulled, would unravel their entire web of lies. I walked to our kitchen, where our smart fridge stood like a silent witness. Everyone followed, creating a strange procession through our once-happy home. Emma trailed behind, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors like a countdown timer. You know, Emma, I said, touching the fridge's screen, when you insisted on getting this expensive model, I thought you just wanted the recipe feature. Remember how you said it would make meal planning easier? I pulled up the messaging app that was still logged into her account. Turns out you were planning more than just meals. The screen flickered to life, displaying weeks of conversations. Emma lunged forward, but her brother Mike caught her arm, holding her back. The room fell silent as I began to read. Here's a good one from last month, I said, my voice steady despite the burning in my chest. Missing you already. Jack's so absorbed in his work. He never notices when I leave early. Remember to park around the corner tomorrow. I scrolled down. Oh, and this gem. The smart fridge was such a good idea. Jack never checks it, and I can message you right in front of him while pretending to look up recipes. Patricia's sob cut through the room like broken glass. She had always been proud of her daughter, the successful real estate agent, the perfect wife, the pillar of their church community. Now she couldn't even look at her. The timestamps are interesting, I continued, each word measured and precise. This one was sent at 3 a.m. last Wednesday. Still awake thinking about today. Can't wait until he leaves for his next trip. I turned to Emma. That was the night before I left for Boston. Were you already planning your radio confession then? You had no right, Emma whispered, but her usual confidence had crumbled. Those messages are private. Private. Robert's voice thundered through the kitchen. He stepped forward, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Like the private family dinners where you brought him. He pointed at Brian, who was trying to blend into the background. The Christmas parties where we welcomed him and his wife. The family prayers we shared. Daddy, please. Emma's mascara had begun to run, black tears tracking down her cheeks. Don't daddy me. Robert's voice cracked with emotion. We raised you better than this. Your mother and I taught you about honor, about commitment. You. His voice broke completely. You used our family, our trust. You made us complicit in your betrayal. Patricia finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. All those times you came to me for advice about your marriage, telling me Jack was distant, that he worked too much. She shook her head slowly. I defended you. I told Jack he needed to make more time for you. All while you were Mom, no, you don't understand, Emma pleaded, reaching for her mother. But Patricia stepped back as if Emma's touch might burn her. I wasn't finished. Walking back to the living room, I retrieved a small box from my briefcase. But the messages aren't even the best part, I said, my voice carrying through the house. You see, I found something else. Something that explains why you've been so interested in my work schedule lately. Something that shows exactly what you and Brian were planning. Emma's eyes widened as she recognized the box. The same type used by the private investigator she'd hired last month. The one whose invoice I'd found in her email, buried in a folder marked House Renovation Ideas. The night was far from over, and this evidence would change everything. Emma rushed toward me, mascara-stained tears streaming down her face, her hands reaching for mine with desperate urgency. Jack, please, she begged. We can work this out. This was a mistake. I love you. The room fell silent as I looked into her eyes. The same eyes that had watched me leave for business trips while she plotted to take everything I'd built. Love, I said softly, reaching for my briefcase. Let me show you what love looks like, Emma. One by one, I pulled out the gifts I'd planned for our anniversary. First, the small white box with the first-class tickets to Florence. Remember how you dreamed about that trip to Italy? I placed them on the coffee table. 3 weeks in Tuscany. A private villa with its own vineyard. Her face crumpled as I continued. The cooking classes you wanted? I laid out the receipts. Booked with that famous chef you follow on Instagram. The one who teaches traditional pasta making. Next came the jewelry box. The antique sapphire necklace you saw in Venice last year? I had my client there track it down. The blue stones caught the light, sparkling accusingly. And this, I pulled out a thick folder. The deed to that cottage in the mountains. The one you said would be perfect for weekend getaways. I closed on it last week. Emma swayed on her feet, each revelation hitting her like a physical blow. Behind her, her mother had stopped crying, watching in stunned silence. But my favorite, I said, reaching for the final item, was this. I held up a leather-bound book. I spent 6 months collecting photos from everyone who knows us. Every trip, every celebration, every moment you pretended to love me. I was going to give it to you in Italy. Then I dropped the book on the pile of gifts and pulled out one last envelope. Instead, you get these. I placed the divorce papers on top of the mountain of evidence of my love and her betrayal. You wanted to take everything from me? Congratulations, Emma. You've lost everything instead.